Getting bored throughout your PhD is a very common feeling. Now here's a little bit of tough love time. If it is not boring at some point, you're doing it wrong. You see, a PhD isn't all about new things, moving from one thing to another quickly. It's about finding something that works and then doing that over and over again until you really understand that process idea, the data, and that's what can get boring. Now, the thing about it is that yes, it can be something that you do have to force yourself to do. And I like to force myself to do it just by being very careful about when I schedule in boring activities. Now, I've always said, and this is something everyone says about a PhD, is that it's a marathon and not a sprint. So how do you make a boring, or at least aspects of a PhD, the boring parts, survivable over the long term? And that really is about scheduling them in for when, first of all, you have the most energy to overcome that boring feeling, overcome the activation energy of actually doing something. And you make sure that it's not just sort of like one boring thing after another, that maybe first thing in the morning, you don't sit down and just go straight to your computer and on Facebook and Reddit or wherever you end up spending most of your time, that you actually sort of like use that initial sort of burst of energy in the morning to go do that boring activity for 1 or 2 hours maximum, and then come back to it the next day or that afternoon at the earliest. But there is a little bit of a dangerous area that you can get yourself into. I certainly found myself there, so let's talk about that. There was a very dangerous part during my PhD where boredom became a habit. And I touched on that a little bit before. Essentially, I would come in every single work morning, sit down at my computer, turn on my computer, and the habit formed that boredom was my default. I would come in and just sit on Facebook at the time and Twitter, and I'd read blogs that had nothing to do with my PhD, but I used as a crutch to get away from the feelings I had towards my research. And this normally happens in the second year because the excitement of the first year is over. Everything's new and interesting. And then in the second year, you end up with a slump. Go check out my other video where I talk about that second year slump. It's sort of a very common phenomena that happens throughout nearly everyone's PhD. So boredom can become a habit, and to stop that habit, you need to break the trigger. For me, it was first thing in the morning. I would have the same routine, go get myself a cup of coffee, sit down at my computer, start everything up, and then emails and Facebook. That was my kryptonite throughout my PhD. And really, it's about understanding that act of going to get a coffee and sitting down did me no favors. So instead, I needed to come in and go straight to the lab, go straight to the library to do some work. I actually found changing my physical location was the best way for me to kind of break any triggers. And think about your day. When is there a bit where you essentially just shoot yourself in the foot? And it's almost certainly a pattern of behavior that you've gotten yourself into. And that can really sort of push the boredom forward. For me, boredom became a habit. Whereas if I was to just go into the lab straight away, I wouldn't have time to sort of like get into consumer mode and sit at my desktop and just kind of like, tippy tap away until lunchtime and then be like, oh, the day's gone. Oh, well, I should just do something else. Maybe I'll go on Facebook just for 10 minutes. And then that habit formed, it got solidified by being repeated over and over again. So break it as soon as you notice it, and you'll be surprised that boredom really kind of fixes itself, or at least in my experience, it fixes itself if you can just kind of break away from the boredom habit. You can start feeling bored when you've actually built up enough skills where they become kind of second nature, whether or not it's reading, whether or not it's analyzing data, whether or not, in my case, it was operating different types of scientific instruments. That boredom means that you're actually quite skilled in a certain area. So I would recommend reaching out to other people and asking if they need help with your skills. It's amazing how refreshing it can be to help someone with with the skills that you now find boring, and they are so thankful for those skills that it kind of refreshes the energy towards that kind of thing that you have been really dreading doing. For me, it was atomic force microscopy, sat in a dark, noise-free environment for hours watching the dial-up kind of line-by-line image forming, and it took hours. But when I was sat there with someone else and they were looking at their samples in a new way for the first time, I felt kind of proud and not bored. So reach out to people, look at who actually needs your skills. Maybe they don't have the skills to analyze their data in a certain way. In my case, it was look at their sample in a new way at the nanoscale. So that is always a way to beat boredom, is invite someone else into your little world and be like, oh, look, I can do this thing. And they're like, oh my God, you're amazing. And there's a bit of you inside that goes, oh yeah, I am a little bit amazing, aren't I? That helps boredom a lot. Is it boredom, or are you overwhelmed? I find myself going towards comfort if I don't know what to do next. Being overwhelmed during a PhD is completely normal, and I think we can self-medicate with boring activities or things that push us towards habits that don't work well for us. And so sometimes the boredom can come from either being a bit scared of taking that next little leap, or by just feeling so overwhelmed by the kind of task in front of you that you can't break it down. So one thing I recommend you do is have a look at what is actually causing the feelings of boredom. In my case, it was like 50-50 really, I think, that it was overwhelmed. It was feeling overwhelmed about the task at hand. So breaking it down into something that excited me and was achievable in a short period of time really helped beat that kind of boredom. The self-preservation of not wanting to do something because it's too scary of a leap means that you get stuck in this cycle of the same activities time and time again. So breaking out of that, breaking out of this feeling of being overwhelmed by the next step means looking at your task, breaking it down and choosing one tiny thing you can complete in like an hour. Even in the chemistry case, even if it's like cleaning up some glassware so you can eventually do that thing, that little bit of momentum can really help. So boredom is sometimes a symptom of being overwhelmed because you're scared. I hope that makes sense. At least it was for me anyway. Sometimes there are no other ways out of being bored than learning something new. Learning something new really is invigorating. It may be as simple as downloading a new bit of software and playing about with it. It could be as simple as talking to someone who you haven't talked to in your research department, even in your research group. And it's that little bit of sort of refreshment. It's like an academic holiday, right? It's like you're not actually going away to do anything, but the little change in your daily activities and the things you're thinking about mean that it is like a little academic holiday for your brain. And taking these regularly, I think, is so important in ensuring that you've got the longevity required to get to the end of a PhD. But do not use it as the first approach for overcoming boredom, because what you'll end up doing is jumping from new idea to new idea to new idea to new thing and not actually becoming an expert in anything. It's part of the weird balance that you have to strike as a PhD student. So boredom is a really powerful tool that you can use to actually kind of turn you into an expert. Sometimes you just need a little holiday, and only have these holidays every few months, as if it was like a job. You know, have your 4 weeks holiday a year doing something completely new and different, and may hopefully complementary to your primary research. But don't be too distracted, but use it as a fun escape every now and again. Now, I'm going to sound like a new age self-help guru, but importantly, you should connect regularly with the underlying purpose of your research. After we have spent years going down these tiny rabbit holes, we forget about the primary purpose of our research. For me, it was about solar cells. It was about creating free, cheap, affordable energy for things. So reconnecting with that purpose really helped me kind of understand why I had to be in the lab all the time, reproducing these different solar cells over and over again, sonicating the same solution for hours in a dark, dingy lab. Those things distract from the true sort of like benefit to humanity of your work. And talking to actually your principal supervisor can sometimes reignite that, because they have their eyes on the prize. They have a much sort of closer relationship with that big benefit. But you're one of their little minions going out doing stuff and doing all the boring stuff. You know, whether it's in a lab, whether it's on your computer, whether it's the reading, whatever it is, you're in the weeds and it can be hard to see the true purpose. So just connecting with that every so often can actually really help. It doesn't have to be like crazy, just a little afternoon where you talk with your supervisor about the exciting big ideas in your field. Why not? The last one is one you probably don't want to hear, but read more papers. I struggled with this a lot. Reading papers, in my opinion, is one of the most boring things any academic can do, but it's fundamental to your success as a PhD student. I didn't do it enough, and I think I suffered for it. So, reading papers can be really boring, but the ideas in them can change your PhD dramatically. Just spending a little bit of time every week reading the latest papers in your field, connecting the dots, going to see what references the best papers have and reading the primary source. It's not something I ever did, but it's weird. You have to kind of like scrape through all of the dirt and the dust, and then just somewhere there's a little sort of like sparkly idea. And when you find that sparkly idea, that's interesting and fun again. But you do have to get through a lot of the rubbish in your field that really doesn't relate to you and maybe is a little bit obvious and trivial. But then all of a sudden this little thing bubbles up, and in grabbing onto that when you've read it and really exploring it can be exciting. So read papers, but understand that the act of reading isn't the kind of like fun part, at least it wasn't for me. It's about sifting out all of the rubbish so you can find that little glowing idea that does excite you. And then once you've got that seed idea, it's amazing how it can kind of like bubble away and its tendrils go out and you follow them and you think this is fun again. So maybe the cure to boredom is getting more bored by reading papers until you find that diamond in the rough, and then it's fun again. So there we have it. That's what you should do if you are finding that your research is getting boring. Do not let boredom become a habit like I did. And importantly, make sure that you are always trying to find little academic holidays throughout your PhD so that you can actually still enjoy the moment of discovery, which is what I think we're all actually trying to find when we do a PhD. So let me know in the comments what you would add to that. Is there anything that really helps you overcome boredom? And if you want to get more information from me, there's two ways to do it. First of all, sign up for my newsletter. It's a free and exclusive email that comes out to you over 2 weeks. It's about 5 emails, everything from the tools I use, the podcasts I've been on, how to write the perfect abstract, and more. It's exclusive content, so go sign up. Doesn't cost you a thing other than your email, but I won't spam you ever, I promise. And secondly, go check out academiainsider.com. That's my new project where I've got my ebooks, the Ultimate Academic Writing Toolkit, as well as the PhD Survival Guide, and there's the forum and the blog growing out there as well. So I'll see you in the next video.